All right, let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll get started. Can you all see my screen on this title page? Can someone just confirm? Good. Awesome. Well, alrighty. Well, I think we'll just go ahead and get started. I'd like to just say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you all for being with me here today, with us today on this wonderful Tuesday afternoon. This is an important milestone for our organization as this officially marks the first stakeholder meeting of 2022 for the Eagle Pass Watershed Stakeholder Group. In the presentation I have prepared for you all today, we will be focusing on a number of topics and items, and starting off with a staff introduction. For those of you who may not be familiar with our organization or what we do, and this will be followed by a general overview of the project, some threats, and a general overview of the project, some threats our river is currently facing, and then we'll dive right into the nitty-gritty with more program-specific and technical information for this project. So we'll just go ahead and get started. For those of you who are, have joined or are still presently joining us, like I said, just go ahead and drop your name in the chat, where you're from, your affiliation, and yes, so we all our participants can get to know each other. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, if you need clarification on a specific item or term, or would just like to know more, please feel free to interject and ask. Additionally, you may also write your questions in the chat. After the presentation is complete, we will have an open period for Q&A, in which myself, in which I will be addressing some of your questions. And as you all know, this presentation is being recorded, so it will be uploaded to our website for future reference. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. So just to introduce myself, we have another participant. Just to introduce myself, some of you may already know me, some of you haven't met me yet. So I'll introduce myself and some of my background. My name is Martin Castro. I am the Watershed Science Director here for the Rio Grande International Study Center. We are an environmental 501c3 nonprofit organization here based out of Laredo, Texas. This organization has been around for over 25 years, since the mid-90s. And prior to my position here at RISC, I worked as a natural resource specialist for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. That's the state environmental agency here in Texas. I was a natural resource specialist, and I spent my time working under the authority of the Rio Grande Water Master Program out of Laredo. And in that capacity, I was responsible for monitoring, conducting inspections and investigations of surface water diversion sites on the Rio Grande and its tributaries to ensure compliance with state laws, rules, and regulations. Our executive director, Ms. Trisha Cortez, couldn't make it to our meeting here today, but I'll just give a quick introduction for Trisha. Trisha is our executive director here at RISC. She's been with our organization now for over 12 years, and she has been critical in guiding this project and securing funding for this new project. And I've been so graciously brought on board to oversee this project. So moving right along, I'd just like to open this presentation with reading a brief vision statement for this watershed project that we are currently working in. And so I'll just go ahead and read it out loud. So we at the Rio Grande International Study Center believe that the San Ambrosio Santa Isabel watershed can be restored to its near original quality of life by reversing the harmful effects of factors such as pollution, erosion, riparian degradation, invasive species, low river flows, and infrastructure needs. We believe that nearly the entire watershed can be restored in an economic and environmentally conscious way, so that knowledgeable and educated communities within the watershed can enjoy its many natural landscapes and features, while still preserving, monitoring, and protecting the watershed's most important natural resource, the Rio Grande River. So this vision statement has sort of guided our work for our project, and will continue to guide it as this project moves forward. So our organization, just for reference, for those that are here with us today, we have actually hosted previous stakeholder meetings, and I'm going to explain why um, in just a couple of slides for this project. Without going into too much detail, because I want to show you this in another slide, um, the geographic extent of this project is quite extensive, and it includes the city of Eagle Pass as well as the city of Laredo. And so we have partitioned this watershed scope for this project to include several planning groups or watershed stakeholder groups per per either per city or per area. So this is the first one we've held for Eagle Pass. We've held meetings for Laredo, and then also for our neighbors in Mexico, our stakeholder groups in Laredo and Mexico. And these meetings have been held virtually due to COVID. And we've held them consistently since about August of last year, when we held our first meeting for Laredo, October and January as well. We've had excellent QA discussions during these meetings and after, with some great questions, very diverse, attendance of stakeholders from throughout the watershed in that area, from different sort of groups, whether it's private, public, sector representatives from businesses, commercial interests, landowners. I mean, you name it. It's a very diverse group that we're working with, and so we expect that same level of we expect to secure that same level of engagement for the Eagle Pass stakeholder group. And the feedback we've received from these meetings has helped guide the items in discussion for future meetings. So just a quick overview. This is the next couple of slides. I'll just present a quick overview of the Rio Grande Basin, just to bring everyone up to speed. Some of you may already know or be familiar with this information. Some of you may not. So we'll just go ahead and dive right in. So the Rio Grande is an enormous, the Rio Grande Basin is an enormous river basin. The drainage area occupies approximately 335 square miles of area. It's the third longest or fourth longest river in the United States, depending on how it's measured. And it is in a transboundary basin. So it's in a very semi-arid water stress region of the United States and Mexico. And depending on its length, on how it's measured, as I mentioned, the length varies, but it's usually around 1,990 miles. In kilometers, I'm not sure how much that is. And it's consistently ranks as one of the top 10 most endangered rivers in the world, according to the World Wildlife Fund. Now, for the Rio Grande, the headwaters of the Rio Grande Basin begin at the base of the San Juan Mountains in the U.S. state of Colorado. And as it passes downstream, as it continues downstream, it'll pass to 3 U.S. states, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, and 5 Mexican states. And after its 1,990-mile journey, it will eventually meet the ocean, where it empties into the Gulf of Mexico in Brownsville. And of course, in many cases, the Rio Grande is our only source of drinking water for our community and many other communities that share this important resource. The Rio Grande, as we know it in Eagle Pass and Laredo, exists in a segment between Del Rio, Texas and Zapata, Texas, which is known as the Middle Rio Grande. And there's an interesting misconception that some folks have, is that the Rio Grande is actually not a free-flowing river in this segment, which includes Eagle Pass and Laredo. In fact, its flows are actually very highly managed through very controlled releases of water from 2 reservoirs. The one that affects us, of course, is Amistad International Dam in Del Rio, Texas. That is the one where the water for our area in the watershed sort of comes from. And then we have, of course, downstream from our location, we have Falcon International Dam, which is outside Zapata, Texas, and that primarily provides storage and water for the Lower Rio Grande Valley in Texas. So communities below that is where that water comes from. So again, not a free-flowing river. It's very highly managed, and this is a misconception that a lot of folks have. Now, the Rio Grande has historically faced numerous threats throughout history. Threats such as pollution, invasive species, um, urbanization, which has led to habitat loss and reduced flows as a result of ongoing drought, increasing temperatures, and of course now climate change and many other issues that the river has historically faced. And all of these issues and threats have only added additional burdens to this already highly stressed river system. And as you can see here, the the Rio Grande Basin in Texas at least continues to be in a state of continued drought, and based on recent drought reports, and we project temperature projections, average temperature trends have projected that the climate, the temperature is only getting warmer for Texas. I think that's based on a study out of the state climatologist office from Texas A&M University. So with this, I want to bring everyone into what is the main part of this presentation, the San Ambrosio 77 Watershed project, and I'll talk about the project itself and the work our organization is currently undertaking for this project. So for starters, one of the most common questions our organization and I get asked is, where is the funding from this project coming from? Who's funding this, and what are the details? So the funding for this project has been sourced from the United States Bureau of Reclamation, or USBR for short. It's a federal agency under the Department of the Interior, and they're primarily responsible for managing and developing many large federal dam projects and water diversion structures that are mainly located throughout the western United States, in states such as New Mexico, Colorado, California, Nevada, those kinds of states. The USBR has projects there. And in later slides, I'll explain why the USBR specifically awarded our organization funding for this project, and how the funds have been allocated, and how they're being used for the fulfillment of some of the grant projects and deliverables for this project. So moving right along, some of you here today might be a little bit less familiar with this terminology. Some of you may already know, but I'll try and explain it to the best of my abilities, so that as we move into more of the technical aspects of this presentation, you'll have a general understanding of the concept and work our organization has undertaken. Now, generally speaking, a watershed is an area of land where precipitation collects and drains into a common outlet. Usually it's a body of water, which can be a lake, a bay, an ocean, or even a river. For our watershed, that is the one that's being referenced in this project, this common body of water is the Rio Grande. And the word watershed itself sometimes can be used interchangeably with other terms, such as a drainage basin or a catchment basin. But essentially, all you need to understand is that a watershed just acts as a funnel, which collects all the water to a single point. And so I like to put things in perspective in a little bit simpler way for most people, just because it's a little easier to understand. And I like to use the analogy of the Russian nesting dolls to explain geographically where our watershed is located and at what level we're working at. So no matter what part of the country, whether you're in the US, Mexico, or any country in the world, you're always located within a watershed. And then it usually just depends on the size or scale of the area that you're trying to look at. So larger watersheds typically contain many smaller sub-watersheds within the large watershed. This just depends on the outflow point. In other words, all of the land that drains water to the outflow point is the watershed for that outflow location. Now, this is important because the stream flow and the water quality of a water body, in this case, the river, are affected by issues and matters that are happening in the area above or upstream of that river's outflow points. Okay. In the next slide, I'll try and give everyone a better idea of the geographic extent and size and scope of this project, and um, and how we're targeting, this watershed restoration project for this area, which can be represented of about this level here. Okay. So following up on this analogy I presented just in the previous slide, this slide will give you a more accurate representation of where the watershed is located geographically and spatially. According to the United States Bureau of Reclamation, the United States Geological Survey, each hydrologic unit is identified by a unique code. It's a several digit code. It's a HUC for short, HUC, and it consists of 2 to 12 digits based on the 6 levels of watershed classification. For the purposes of this presentation, we'll be taking a closer look at the first 4 levels. Starting with the first level, which is classified as a region, we have, of course, the Rio Grande Basin as a whole. This is a 2-digit level. And secondly, as we move to the next level, we go down to the 4-digit level. This is considered a subregion. And thirdly, we'll move down, excuse me, the 6-digit level, which is right here. And this compromises the, I think it's called the a basin, the basin level. And then these two combined will focus in here, and we'll go down to our 4th classification, which is the 8-digit level, which is here. Let me go back just a minute. So we come from our 6-digit level of basin, and then we go down to the 8-digit level, which is our sub-basin. And this is the geographic extent, or the geographic scale, that our project we are working within, officially classified again as a sub-basin. So I'll go over some facts in the next couple of slides and other interesting details about the watershed. For now, I want you to reference this map, and I'll talk a little bit about it, and feel free to ask any questions. So this is the San Ambrosio Santa Isabel Watershed project map. It's so named for 2 creeks that lie on the US side, San Ambrosio Creek and Santa Isabel Creek. They're located, let me just activate my pointer here. They're located, I believe this is Santa Isabel Creek here, and Santa Isabel Creek is somewhere over here, and this larger creek is San Ambrosio Creek here. So mostly located in the southern portion of this watershed. The drainage area for this watershed is quite extensive. It's 5,768 square miles, or about, I think in kilometers, it's something like 14,000 square kilometers. So it's very extensive. And as you can see, it is a watershed that encompasses both countries, the US and Mexico. And encompasses the US state of Texas and the Mexican states of Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, and Coahuila. So quite an extensive project. And this is the geographic extent that our project, our organization is currently working on. But of course, we'd like, for this meeting, we are focusing this meeting to focus on the stakeholder group for Eagle Pass, which is, of course, located up here on the northern extent of the watershed. Now, when I talk about watershed boundaries and extents, it's important to define the extent, these extents, because the extent of surface water drainage is important, and it always comes down to a point. And so these boundaries, the way these maps are sort of, delineated is these boundaries usually tend to follow the highest ridgeline around stream channels in the network, and they meet at either the bottom or the lowest point of land where water flows in and then out of the watershed. And so we produced this map to give a little bit more idea, a better idea of the elevation and hydrology of the watershed. And this was produced by our organization using digital elevation modeling from the USGS. And it shows the watershed's elevation, its extent of its drainage area, the terrain, the stream network order, and the tributaries and main stem, that are located within the watershed. Again, the drainage area is 5,768 square miles. The main stem, of course, being the Rio Grande River. Again, it includes the state of Texas. And again, this was made using digital elevation modeling technology. So a pretty good representation of the elevation and hydrology features of the watershed. Looks like a little bit ahead of myself there. Okay, these facts were not supposed to come in. Sorry. So just a couple more facts about the watershed. It is, as I mentioned, so named for those two creeks on the U.S. Side, Santa Rosa Creek and Santa Isabel Creek. As we already know, the watershed is located in an area of the Rio Grande Basin in South Texas, which we already know is the Middle Rio Grande. And it encompasses, again, a large area, includes major cities such as Laredo, Eagle Pass, and Piedras Negras. They're about the largest cities in the watershed. And of course, we do have a lot of other communities located within the watershed. It's also important to note that the watershed itself, about 70 to 60% of it, most of the drainage basin lies in Mexico. That's something that's not unusual for the Rio Grande Basin as a whole. A lot of the watershed, if you look at the big picture, majority of it does lie in the U.S. In Mexico. So about the other 30 to 20% lies in Texas. But it is a binational watershed, including both countries. So it's all connected. So I'd like to talk a little bit about population growth and the projections by the counties, at least in Texas, that we have studied, and the type of growth we're expected to see within the watershed. So according to the Rio Grande Regional Water Planning Group, in their 2021 Regional Water Plan for Region M, in that report, for the two U.S. counties that are located within this watershed, Webb and Maverick, are based on current projection estimates. We are expected to see the following population increase from 2020 to 2070. You'll notice that on the graphs here to your left, to the left of the screen. And Webb County will see a significant increase in the next 50 years. From the current population estimates, 318,000 people in Webb County to over 647,000 people in 2070. And that is a 68% increase in the next 50 years, which is pretty significant. Maverick is also expected to have a population growth increase from 63,000 people in 2020 up to 107,000 people in 2070. That's about roughly a 30 to 40% increase in 50 years. It's not quite as significant as Webb's, but nevertheless, this begs the question, can our watershed and its most important natural resource, the Rio Grande River, adequately sustain this municipal demand for drinking water for these populations for the next 50 years? So we'll be answering that question later on in this presentation. So moving on from our watershed maps, these population statistics, I'd like to sort of give you a brief overview of the timeline for this project and some of the phases that have been involved. And I'll go into more detail about these in the next slide. So this project began in the spring of, officially launched in the spring of last year of 2021. That's actually when I came on board with this organization. Officially though, this grant was, there was a lot of behind the scenes work to get even to this point, last year. So there was a lot of planning that went on behind the scenes before we officially had, the capabilities to officially get this project off the ground and going. So that was in 2021. And then, so phase one has included of this project data collection and stakeholder interviews, which we have hosted. We have had several public, as you all know, we had several public meetings for our Laredo portion of the Watershed Stakeholder Group and Mexico as well in 2021. This has been followed by phase two, collaborative planning meetings with stakeholders, which are still currently ongoing. And then, whoops, got a little, jumped ahead there. Excuse me, I'm not sure why this didn't have anything here, but there should be a little information here that says public meetings in 2022, which of course we've had 2 this year already. I apologize for that. And then in phase 3, we are going to produce a summary report for stakeholders and the public. And that will culminate with the project conclusion when we submit our final report to the Bureau in fall of 2022, which will just include basically a summary of everything that went on in the last 2 years for this project. So that's sort of a not rough timeline, but it's a pretty good representation of the timeline that we're working with. Oh, there it is. Okay. I guess it got lost. So again, just to reiterate the project approach, phase 1 is our data synthesis and interviews with stakeholders. Phase 2 is collaborative planning meetings with our stakeholders. And then phase 3 includes a summary report for project participants and the public. And so it's important to understand that hosting these meetings, planning, and reviewing information that we've synthesized, and of course listening to concepts and other suggestions from these interviews is important, because we ultimately have to, and I'm going to go into more detail in a few slides, the ultimate goal of this of these meetings is to prioritize watershed management projects for this watershed. And so we've been reviewing new and historical qualitative and quantitative data that comes to light, conducting, geospatial analysis, such as the maps that you've seen, that will inform this process and the public itself. And so we approach this project in this 3-tiered approach to adequately plan for the sort of the vastness of this required, this work. And then in phase 3, as I mentioned, producing the summary report will be available to all the project participants, such as yourselves and the public, which will detail key objectives and priority projects for the watershed. So this project in its entirety ties into our organization's water security, land, and climate change initiative. And you may be asking, how does it tie in? What does water security mean for our community, or what is water security? So I'll explain in these next couple of slides. And so if you remember that vision statement that I read at the beginning of this presentation, so just keep this vision statement in mind as I go through this slide, and it'll make a little bit more sense about why this initiative that we launched a few years ago is so important. So when it comes to water security, that essentially just means societies and communities such as ours can only enjoy water security when they are able to successfully manage their water resources and services to meet the needs of each dimension of water security. And there's several, and I'll show them here in the following visual representation. So for domestic water security, it means a community or communities should provide all people with reliable, safe drinking water. From an economic perspective, this means a community should strive to sustain and support productive economies in the agriculture industry and energy sectors. From an urban standpoint, we can create better water management and services to support vibrant and livable communities. Environmentally, this means the environmentally conscious restoration of rivers and ecosystems. And lastly, when we talk about disaster-related water security, communities should be able to build and adapt to changes before and after, for major disasters such as floods, hurricanes, and other natural disasters that may impact our communities. So that's essentially what this initiative and why this project and program were even developed, because that's a very important part. That's a very important aspect to the work our organization does. But it's not the only part, right? But it focuses on the why of this project. Why this group, why this extent, why this scope. So, and I'll address that here as I promised in earlier slides, and I'll address why this program was developed. And so, in our original written request for funding to the USBR, that's the federal agency that is currently funding this project. We sought funding to develop a new watershed group, primarily because no watershed planning group currently exists within this area, for this area. Our organization, meanwhile, has completed little to no watershed restoration planning or projects, and so we require more substantial support, for building our capacities to undertake the establishment of such groups, including completing outreach to stakeholders and funding, such critical restoration work. Additionally, there are a few existing studies from public and private entities that have fully addressed this area of the Rio Grande. And so we've anticipated that the geographic scale within the watershed that you have seen, that we are working within, is the appropriate and best level for which we can achieve results for our region. And so just briefly, I'll go over some of the restoration project objectives. I won't go list all of them, but there are some that are very important. They're all important, right? But some that really, stand out, of course, are improving water quality and quantity for our area, increasing wildlife habitats for native species, and building such important relationships for our between stakeholders in our community. And of course, other project objectives. We really want to understand flood and drought resilience as it pertains to climate change. We want to identify, the landscapes and soils that have changed historically over the years, and identify, what's been lost over time, what's been erased because of either urban development or other, there as a result of other developments. And of course, we want to ensure we establish boundaries for future water, land, and development. So very sort of broad, but very focused at the same time objectives for this project. So from those objectives, we hope to identify and prioritize solutions to some of the persistent problems and future challenges our watershed faces. And this is, again, important in order to secure the necessary funding to begin to restore the watershed. And this will be only accomplished most likely through the drafting of what's known as a watershed restoration plan, which is a term that some of you may know. A watershed restoration plan, if you're asking or wondering, what exactly does a watershed restoration plan do, or what does it entail? And I think I've mentioned it several times during this presentation. So in this slide, I'll try and address this very commonly asked question. A watershed restoration plan, in the simplest sense, is a tool. And it's an important tool for identifying and prioritizing the work necessary to improve water resources in a particular watershed. It provides essentially a step-by-step framework for identifying issues and then outlining those issues with solutions within the watershed and the resources that are needed to carry them out, by financial, technical, or volunteer means. For example, these issues and their solutions, may include riparian restoration efforts, channel reconstruction, stream restoration, landscape restoration, natural enhancements, and of course, many others. And so for the majority of these plans, of these watershed restoration plans, the primary goals usually tend to focus on the water, from the water quality perspective, that's usually the first issue that people try and that entities and individuals try and focus on, because it's usually the biggest issue. And that usually in that perspective, they try and tackle it by reducing non-point, source pollutants, uh, pollutants such as excess sediment, nutrients, or high temperatures. But each watershed restoration plan also has the opportunity to express, unique concerns or conservation goals for that particular watershed. No two watershed plans are alike, and very rarely can they be used interchangeably because uh, every watershed has its own unique problems and inherited, characteristics. But again, these plans can only be accomplished through a strong stakeholder collaboration and feedback. And so to identify these issues and of course propose solutions. This isn't a project that our organization can do on its own. It requires the participation and collaboration of stakeholders such as yourselves. And so, as I mentioned previously, developing these watershed restoration plans includes the input of a lot of stakeholders. These stakeholders, will guide, will be the ones who guide restoration plan development through this input, and to a certain extent see that all the interests, not all, but most of the interests actually are covered within this plan. But by encouraging involvement from our watershed stakeholders, these sorts of plans can successfully guide the water resource work that will maximize public benefit by focusing efforts on areas of highest need, greatest potential benefit, and of course allowing resource funding to be used most efficiently. And so to secure involvement for this project and engagement, we have taken considerable efforts to spread, the word out for our, the work that we're doing. This includes newsletters that we've sent out. We made a lot of phone calls, emails. You may have received some text messages, social media posts. And this is something that our organization, we're really trying hard to work on this. It's just, a lot of folks, there's so many folks to reach out to in such a large area. And so we try and reach out in the most efficient way possible. But we're always open to receiving input and sort of reaching out to folks that others may suggest, suggest reaching out to this group or that group or this person or that person, or sending emails to so-and-so about this project. So we really encourage that. And again, if there's ever any more information that you all need from our organization on this project, we're certainly happy to provide it. And so there are things that characterize this watershed. I'm going to go into some detail, what makes it either unique or what separates it from other watersheds, either in Texas or in Mexico, or even throughout the Rio Grande Basin. Now, there are usually the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, characterizes that there are 5 broad categories of data that are used to accurately categorize a watershed. And so in this presentation, we've actually already talked about a few of these. We've talked about physical and natural features of the watershed. We've talked about the land use and population, some of the projection estimates. We've talked about those. So now on the next couple of slides, I'll talk about some of the water body conditions, some of the pollutant sources, and the monitoring data that has been collected for this watershed. So bacteria counts in the Laredo sector and Eagle Pass sector of the Rio Grande continue to be a consistent problem. And so our section of the river is actually, subsequently impaired as a result. And these issues primarily stem from untreated sewage discharges from, sources on the Rio Grande, in Mexico. But what does the word impairment actually mean? So the state of Texas actually publishes the Texas Surface Water Quality Standards for each river basin. Water quality data that's obtained through the IBWC's Clean Rivers program is used to help determine whether particular stream segments on the Rio Grande are meeting these water quality standards. And so according to the IBWC's, the International Boundary Water Commission's 2020 Basin Highlights Report for the Rio Grande Basin in Texas, segment 2304, which is below Amistad Reservoir, and includes the area within our watershed for the cities of Laredo and Eagle Pass, it continues to be impaired by the following impairments. The parameters are mainly, of course, bacteria, but also they include toxicity in the water from, specifically for nitrogen-containing nutrient ammonia levels, essentially. And so high levels of this nutrient can potentially be toxic to aquatic life. And so these are essentially the two factors, the two parameters, I'm sorry, for the that continue to affect this segment of the Rio Grande below Amistad. And so this figure that you see here is sort of an excellent example of the impairments and where they're located geographically that are found throughout the Rio Grande Basin in Texas. This figure is courtesy of IBWC. You can see Laredo here at the bottom, of course, suffering from bacteria impairments, and then Eagle Pass and Del Rio as well. So it's a great visual representation of what is affecting our area. So moving on to a water availability and conservation perspective, let's discuss water supply. And so according to data obtained from TCEQ, Laredo has a current municipal surface water supply of approximately 61,825 acre feet per year. And that is, I think, for about 2020. That is to say, in one calendar year, the city of Laredo is authorized to divert or pump over 61,000 acre feet of surface water from the Rio Grande for municipal use only. And so as an analogy, maybe asking what is an acre foot, what kind of volumes are we talking about? An acre foot equals equates to approximately 325 gallons, 325,851 gallons to be precise, which is the same volume if you fill up an area of water, which is an acre, with water that's about a foot deep. So that gives you a good idea. And the reason we use that instead of gallons is that when we talk about these volumes, which are massive, we avoid getting into these volumes, into these large numbers, very quickly. So acre feet is used to sort of condense the sort of volumes that we work within. And so the municipal supply of Laredo the municipal supply in acre feet for the city of Laredo will possibly meet the demands through the year 2040, which is not that far away. I mean, that's less than 19 years. And I'm going to talk about why. So there's a lot of things like, when we talk about water supply, we know that it's not infinite, right? So with those numbers in mind that I just discussed, let's take a look at the current supply and demand within the watershed for the cities of Laredo and the cities of Eagle Pass. So again, according to the Regional Water Planning Group in their 2021 report for Region M, the municipal water demand for the city of Laredo is expected to increase by 63% to 2070. And that's what you see here in these highlighted in blue. So that's just the demand on the city for municipal supply, for the municipal supply in acre feet. But of course, the key to remember is this year here in 2040, because by 2040, the city of Laredo is expected to exhaust or even meet the available supply of 61,000 acre feet that is allocated currently per year for the city. So while we have 61,000 and we're covered for about 2020, 2030, in 2040, we're getting close to meeting or exceeding that supply. And in Eagle Pass, this demand, excuse me, is expected to increase by 51% over the next 50 years. Now, I didn't have data. I don't have data for what the current supply for the city of Eagle Pass is, but I assume, like most municipalities, the city of Eagle Pass, like the city of Laredo, has been adequately prepared for the next 20 or 40 years. And there are a couple of options that are being considered right now in order to prepare for this, for the next 20 years. And that includes, I think, in the master plan for the city of Laredo, the possibility of secondary water sources and alternatives to meet the needs for, these expected population growths and water demands. So in the next part of this presentation, I wanted to share with you all some of the results of a survey that we actually have launched to collect information for the watershed itself. It's sort of our way of trying to engage our stakeholders and collecting information. When you're trying to collect information from a huge area, this can be one of the most effective ways to do so. So I'll share some of the results just briefly in the next couple of slides. So the watershed, this stakeholder survey again is up on our website right now. And again, it's been formulated in a way to not only identify potential stakeholders such as yourselves, but also their willingness to participate in projects, in this project and in meetings and other opportunities that we're pursuing as part of this project. It lists in a little bit more detail the objectives and goals of this work. And the survey itself is not very long. It's only 15 questions. But I'm only going to highlight the first 4 in these next couple of slides, as these are some of the most important questions that have been asked in the survey. And again, this survey is up on our website at www.rgisc.org, and it's still open for public feedback, and it will be open for a few more weeks. And at the end of this presentation, I can actually share this link in the chat for those that are interested in providing this important feedback. So in question 1 of the survey, we asked, what is your interest in the San Ambrosio 77 watershed? What, as an individual organization, where are you, what do you represent? Where are you from? And so I'll give some information here on some of the statistics that folks have actually answered. And so we have several choices. And so out of all the choices and responses that we've actually received in the last couple of months, a large part of the folks that are within that have answered the survey have checked off, the fact that they are concerned citizens living within the watershed. That is sort of probably the biggest choice that people have checked off. Surprisingly, another one of the choices, the second most popular interesting choice, is that we have a lot of individuals that are also outdoor recreational enthusiasts in the watershed that are interested in this project. And of course, some of the other ones we also have, of course, we do have some concerned citizens, individuals that are living outside the watershed, but we also have, of course, a percentage of landowners, folks that represent commercial interests, folks that represent public interests, such as working in the public sector or from governmental bodies. Educators and researchers, of course, also make up a small percentage. Water right holders and others. So this is a good idea, representation of the kind of folks that we've tried to secure engagement for this project. Second question, probably the most important question actually, is what wanted to know what are the biggest problems that folks are, that they think are facing, the watershed is facing today. So I'll briefly go over that. Of course, like as expected, the biggest problem that people sort of checked off in this survey is that water quality and pollution continues to be the biggest problem that our watershed faces. That's what folks believe. The second is threats to native habitat loss and riparian degradation. That is a big sort of issue that folks believe that our watershed is facing. Of course, also we have low river flows and shortages, and other, of course, issues, flooding and erosion control and invasive species control. So these are all very important. The data that we are collecting from this survey is so important to this project because it's essentially the heart of what, as the Bureau wants to know, they want to know what does the public, what do they think are the biggest issues? And the data we've collected from this is going to be so valuable to formulate the watershed restoration plan, because we'll know exactly what projects and what priorities that we need to focus on for this project. And so data like this is very valuable. Folks also answered, in the survey, we provide a map. The maps you've actually seen. We had a lot of folks, of course, know that they're actually located within the watershed. And so it's important to know that, again, we want to make sure that we're collecting the right, the right interests from the right people in the right area. And then lastly, we wanted to ask, what, based on our current use, on their current use of the Rio Grande Rio Bravo, and what are their expected uses, and what are the ones that are most important to people such as yourselves. So we had a lot of folks answer, that of course, as expected, municipal water ranked, highest in terms of which uses are the most important, and I think that's not a stretch to say that, it is extremely important. But we also have folks that said that the second most important use, based on how many answered our survey, is that the Rio Grande should also be used for habitat for birds and native wildlife. Very important, of course. Also for irrigation and farming, extremely important as well. And recreational use. And so again, the uses that people have sort of ranked, this is a good representation of what they believe, what the public believes are the most important uses. And so we're getting close here to finishing off our presentation, and then we'll have it open for questions and answers. And I'm just going to go ahead and just reiterate, why this work is important. And so for starters, water is a critical resource for human health, economic development, and agricultural productivity, and it connects all aspects of growth and development. And so when we talked about water security in the earlier part of the presentation, we talked about how water security can only be achieved when there is enough water for everyone in a region and the water supply is not at risk of disappearing or at risk of contamination. And so the work our organization will be doing is being done in such a way that we'll be disseminating the information and feedback from you, the stakeholders and the public, as we already have in our survey. And we will continue to do so in order to identify, some of the more persistent problems our watershed faces. And because, securing our water will be essential to ensure a better future for generations to come. And so to conclude, we at Risk foresee a future where we have established greater water security for Laredo and surrounding communities. As we previously mentioned, we are currently in the process of developing this watershed stakeholder group and the watershed restoration plan to propose solutions to the problems our watershed is facing. And so eventually we foresee being able to secure funding to begin restoring our watershed. And as I mentioned, just a simple call to action. I wanted to, spread the word. I want you all to spread the word to coworkers, families, friends, teachers, enthusiasts, anyone and everyone who's interested in participating and take our watershed survey. I will be dropping a link in the chat for those that are interested. And so that will be a great way to secure engagement and feedback. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we open up to our, we'll have it on our open period for question and answer. Feel free to ask as many questions as you want. I'll be happy to answer them. Any sort of feedback, suggestions, needed more clarification on a particular item or topic, please do so at this time. went ahead and stopped sharing my screen so we can move on to this part of the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and check the chat. Let's see here. So I have a question here. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud from Mr. Kanan, the biology professor at Southwest Texas Junior College in Eagle Pass. Thank you, Mr. Kanan. It says, it is suggested in the future the TCEQ be a part of these meetings as well, to be beneficial and to be up to date on the latest issues and water quality issues in the state and across the country. Thank you very much, Mr. Kanan, for your suggestion. We've actually invited folks from the TCEQ to be a part of this project. They are aware of it at the local regional level. And so it's, yeah, I've had a few folks reach out from the TCEQ reach out to me on, suggestions and other tips. I'm hoping that in the next round of meetings, we can actually secure their involvement. So thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Kana. Let's see here. I have another question. I had a question in the chat come in from Mrs. Renee Zimmerman. I think she had to leave a little earlier. She says, thank you for the invitation and the work being conducted. And she's just saying, certainly look into the dissemination of information of individuals affiliated with Southwest Texas Junior College. So thank you to Ms. Zimmerman. Let's see here. Mr. Cannon, I also see you had another suggestion here. I'm going to just read that out loud if you don't mind. It is suggested to plan a regional water testing lab to monitor the water quality for biological and biological contamination on a daily basis. Our organization, Mr. Cannon, if you didn't know, we actually participate in the Clean Rivers program that's actually hosted through the IBWC. It's a monthly sampling that our organization actually goes out and samples at several sites here in Laredo for several parameters. I think there's 10, including bacteria, metals, other contaminants. And so that's part of and we've been in this program since the early 90s, I believe. And so we send these samples out to a lab, and then they're recorded in a database that's then cataloged by the IBWC. So we've, been a part of this for several years now. Just checking the chat here for more information. Okay, so the City of Eagle Pass, Mr. Kanan, they do publish, an annual water report on water quality. I actually haven't seen the newest report, but I think in the next meeting we can certainly bring it up for discussion and discuss it for our stakeholders. It's this meeting, just so we're all sort of on the same page, was as sort of an introductory meeting to this project. In the next meeting, I think we can go into a little bit more detail technically into more detail for other technical aspects of this project. But again, it was just sort of to introduce ourselves, to introduce this project. Does anyone else have any other questions for myself? Suggestions? I'd be happy to answer them at this time. Let me see if I can pull up the survey link to our website. Actually, better yet, let me just show you my screen here and show everyone how we can access how you all can access our website. So I'll just share my screen here. So this is our website, www.risk.org. If you go to this tab here called Your River and click on Watershed Stakeholder Survey, you'll see this is the sort of the main page to take our survey. and it's actually in 2 languages, English and Spanish. So we can collect information from both our Mexican stakeholders and our U.S. stakeholders. If you click English here, just as an example, the survey will pop up and it'll just give you, and it's in a single page, and you'll see all the information here that I have mentioned, some of the questions here that I've outlined, and you'll have plenty of, uh, of space to answer, further if you need more information, if you want to provide more information to our organization. Um, Again, some of these questions are optional. They're not a long survey at all. It only takes about 10 minutes to complete. So I highly encourage you all to answer this survey, and so we can really capture that information that's very important. Um, and just so you all know, in our watershed restoration plan, we're not collecting names. All we're trying to collect is statistics. And so, we're really, everybody will be represented, but those statistics will be very important. So um, that's how we'll be incorporating that information into our plan. So let's see here. I'm just going to monitor the chat one more time. Mr. Zimmerman, I see here you have a question. I'm going to go ahead and read that out loud. Beyond stakeholder involvement during the planning process, will there be any future opportunities for volunteers and stakeholders to contribute to watershed restoration work? Yes, there are going to be many opportunities, actually. So this is kind of like a 2-part question. I'm going to explain why. In this project that our organization is currently working on, this is only part 1. Okay, and it's part 1 in just a planning phase. All right, which is just gathering stakeholders, gathering the data, synthesizing the information, and then producing a watershed restoration plan. So this is just a planning phase of this work. Part 2, if we're able to secure funding, will actually be the boots on the ground restoration work. And that's like the watershed restoration plan is done, it's finalized, it has the sort of the project lists, and that's when we'll be able to secure volunteers, stakeholders to partake in restoration efforts. So that's, again, this project is a multi-year project. It's not something that's going to it's not something that's going to happen overnight. That's if we secure funding for phase 2, which we will try and do when the opportunity comes up. But before we do that, again, the only way we can actually secure funding for it is that the Bureau wants to see that this stakeholder group is involved, actively participating in meetings, and want to be a part of this and providing feedback. And that's the only way to do so. And then, of course, the watershed itself, because it's so large, we will identify, important restoration projects. So the second part of that question, as I mentioned, we actually have, this past weekend here in Laredo, Texas, our organization, in partnership with Texas A&M International University, actually hosted a cleanup event at a nature trail here in Laredo, Texas, Las Palmas Nature Trail. And that, again, it's related to the work for this project, but it's not the same project, but it's considered watershed restoration work because there was a lot of cleanup of materials. Our organization is, of course, trying to secure funding for other restoration activities. It includes restoration activities for that same trail that will include invasive species removal, native tree planting, brush management, creek management, and I think riverbank restoration. So again, a lot of sort of projects here and there, but sort of the larger picture, this project, once we secure funding for phase 2 restoration work, we will certainly be reaching out for opportunities for volunteers and stakeholders to contribute to this work. Boots on the ground, get hands, getting your hands dirty kind of work. So that'll be soon to come, definitely. I hope I answered your question, Mr. Zimmerman. Let's see here. I'm just going to read up on the chat really quick. This meeting was slated to run to about 2:30, but it looks like we'll be finishing a little bit earlier today. So ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you all. Again, my name is Martin Castro, work here for RISC. I can provide you all, actually be setting up a follow-up email with my information. So please spread the word out again to family and friends. I'll send up a follow-up email with my contact information. Please feel free to suggest, again, anything and everything you feel, how we can contribute to these critical restoration efforts. We really want to make sure that that our neighbors up north in Eagle Pass, which I've been to before, which I've been visited Eagle Pass many times before, are included as part of this project. It's a requirement that we include this stakeholder group. And so with working within these groups, of course, Laredo, Eagle Pass, and then our neighbors, our Mexican stakeholders, very important 3 groups that can all contribute to this plan. And so we thank you all very much for your time and your participation. Keep an eye out for our newsletters. I think you all should be on our mailing list. Feel free to, again, visit our website, find out more. And yeah, anyone else have any other questions? If not, we can close out this meeting for this afternoon. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for attending today's meeting. We'll be catching up soon. Thank you all very much.